Hey y'all, welcome to my review of the rise of dictators in World War II. And we're going to start the review today by talking about Joseph Stalin. Now, before I get really into him as an individual and some of the events that happened, I want to give a little bit of a caveat. So, if you are a student of mine, I hope that you understand that I try to de-emphasize the role of exact dates in history. I am a firm believer in looking at the relationships that the events have more than the dates. And I'm not saying to completely forget about all dates, but just know that the dates that I'm going to give you is really just to help you develop an understanding of the rise of Stalin in this time era, and should not be used as some way for you to quickly write down all the dates and remember them as soon as you can. If you have a teacher that is like that, unfortunately I'm not. So this may not be the right video to click to if you want to review this material. And with that said, let's go ahead and start with my boy Joseph. So Joseph Stalin is actually going to start his story in 1917, and I clicked it. I clicked in the next slide, which is great. So it actually starts in 1917. And in 1917, you have the Russian Revolution overthrowing Tsar Nicholas II in Russia. So Russian Revolution. And you might remember that we talk about the entry of World War I and the Allied and Axis powers, and at the end of the war you see that the Allied powers were actually in a little bit of a worse spot because Russia had to leave the war before it ended due to the revolution and a lot of the internal turmoil that's going on, a lot of hunger. So soon after the Russian Revolution, you have the Communist Party, which is led by Vladimir Lenin, and it established itself as the sole authority in the country. And in 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, is officially formed. And I tend to shorten that to the Soviet Union. And if you look at this map here, this is actually an image of the Soviet Union. You have Russia, which starts off in this deep red, and all of these pink countries that you see, about a dozen of them, are joining or have joined the Soviet Union in 1922. So within 5 years, you have the area of Russia almost doubling in size. And you have a relationship being built of a dozen countries that are now a part of this super continent or super state in a way. And unfortunately, something bad happens in 1924. The leader of the Soviet Union, Vladimir Lenin, dies. And what is super fascinating, and if you are kind of weird like I am, and you are interested in this kind of stuff, Lenin was actually embalmed the moment he died. And you can visit Lenin's body if you visit St. Petersburg to this day. He's in the, I believe he might be in the Cathedral of Spilled Blood, but I don't want to guarantee that that's where he's located. But you can see him, and he is embalmed in a way that like you don't even know that he's dead. He looks like he's sleeping. It's incredible. It's insane. But going off topic here, Vladimir Lenin dies, and in his place is our boy Stalin. Stalin takes control and begins to lead the Soviet Union. Stalin took control, he actually had a set of goals for the Soviet Union. And one of those goals is to raise agricultural production. And I'm going to put an arrow, and that's going to symbolize raise, like raising or rising from the dead. So rise, or the raising of agricultural production. What is really weird, you have Russia, which is the largest country in the entire world, but a large majority of it actually is pretty useless. A lot of this, especially in this general area here, is just ice. You cannot grow plants or agriculture in this region. So the Soviet Union and Russia is really kind of stuck in trying to grow the crops in areas that are going to allow the growth, especially Ukraine. Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe, and it becomes incredibly important for the Soviet Union, really for the rest of its existence. But it wants to raise agriculture. Additionally, he wants to modernize industry. Let me see if I can fit that. Modernize industry. Meaning he wants to develop factories that will make stuff that he can sell to other countries. And the two goals are linked because increasing exports of food would bring in cash that would then be put into modernizing industry. So it's just like never-ending cycle of people buying food and that food coming to the modernization of industry. They're going to be selling it from outside, the other countries outside of the Soviet Union, and that money is going to be used on introducing more agriculture and more modernity or in their industry. So to help with this plan, in 1928, Stalin develops his 5-year plan. And if you are a Soviet historian about the Soviet Union, you might be telling yourself, look, Miss Jump, the 5-year plan is just one of the 5-year plans. There are like 3 5-year plans that happen, and it's true. But I want to focus on this first 5-year plan that occurs in 1928. And the reason I want to focus on it is because this plan called for taking of private land from farmers and forcing them to move into collective farming. So many farmers obviously did not want to leave the farmland that they have probably lived in for generations and live in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of people they don't know to collectively farm. And those who resisted, however, were shot dead or relocated to Siberia to work in the gulags, which is basically concentration camps, or the Soviet version of concentration camps. So you really have 2 options. You can either hate your job working in a collective farm here and wherever you're located in Russia, or you can hate your life and your job in the freezing cold weather of Siberia among a bunch of strangers. So most people, if they weren't killed, continue to try to make the most of it. However, millions of people died in the famine that followed the shift to collective farms. It was a mess. You have majority of people doing okay with like developing it, but distributing it equally among this giant state that we now know of as the Soviet Union is a very difficult task. Stalin could have diverted some of the food to the starving farmers. However, he sold them abroad to earn cash to again increase the modernization in his industry and his goals that he has for the Soviet Union. But the industrial part of his plan, number 2 of his 2-part plan that he has for the Soviet Union, was a success. And by the 1930s, modernized factories were churning out machinery, steel and iron and consumer goods all over the country. And it actually helped to jumpstart parts of the regions in Russia that could not support agriculture, and they became industrial centers. Stalin kind of decided. So Stalin was known for using brutal methods to strengthen his control of the Communist Party. And in 1934, he started to purge the party. And what I mean by purging is he began to arrest party officials, put them on trial, and executed. And by 1936, he had his secret service or secret police doing that by rounding up and killing enormous numbers of party leaders, military officers, industrial managers, etc., etc. The one thing that you need to know more than anything else about Stalin is the fact that he is, by every definition of the word, extremely paranoid. Any person who even attempts to just a little bit of power, Stalin takes that and believes that they are trying to take over the entire country. So anybody who stood a chance to ever gain power in the Soviet Union was exterminated, literally and figuratively. And what this left is the Great Purge, and it claimed millions of lives throughout the Soviet Union and ensured that the remaining officials that stayed in the Soviet Union are going to be 100% loyal to Stalin and Stalin alone. So before I end this video up, I want to talk about some of the main characteristics we just discussed of totalitarianism in Soviet Union. So I'm going to write characteristics So the first characteristic that you see of totalitarianism in the USSR, I should say specifically Stalin, is the understanding that the Communist Party is the only authority in the entire country. And in extension, that means that Stalin is the only authority in the country because he is the head of the Communist Party. Ooh. Additionally, you have state planning of the economy. Completely taking control of every single aspect of the economy in the Soviet Union, deciding what is being made and where and how and who gets the benefit from that. And this kind of extends here, and I was going to make this into a third point, but I think it might be easier just to kind of make that an extension to the second point, is Joseph Stalin's use of collective farms to help with this planning of the economy. And collective farming would actually be used later when we get into the Chinese Revolution. And the collective farming that exists there is going to be just as bad as the communist collective farming that you see in the Soviet Union. If there's anything to learn from that, is that history does matter, and we need to learn our history, or you're going to have millions of people die for no reason than for your own power. And finally, the final characteristic that I think is important is the use of brutal purges to maintain control within the Soviet Union. So that concludes my video on the rise of Joseph Stalin. And many of you might be thinking, like, that cannot be all, and it's not. I simplified his rise into totalitarian power the easiest way I could. So I took away a lot of the smaller things that I don't think really mattered in the scheme of things. If you are interested in Joseph Stalin and his collective farming and totalitarianism and his brutal purges across the Soviet Union, I'm going to be linking a bunch of really awesome sources down below, and I welcome you to look through that. And within those sources, you will always fall down that deep hole of finding more sources. So If you're a student of mine, then you are more than welcome to contact me at any point asking questions. I have a separate Gmail account that's used for this YouTube, so I'm not going to be sharing my public school ID or my school email. But if you have any questions that you just don't feel like it needs to be in an email, you're more than welcome to go ahead and comment them down below, and I will get to them as soon as I notice them. I hope you stay tuned to my other rundowns on the rise of totalitarian leaders or dictators during World War II. See you in a bit.